Critical news. CNN reporting now on a potential giant change in U.S. policy that could have dramatic consequences for the battlefield in Ukraine. Sources telling CNN the Biden administration is finalizing a deal to send American-made Abrams tanks to the battlefield. CNN's Oren Lieberman live at the Pentagon for us. Oren, this is a big shift. What's happening?
It is. For a long time, the U.S. and the Pentagon had said the Abrams tank was not the right fit for the fight, urging other countries to send their tanks. We're now learning, according to 3 U.S. officials familiar with the matter, that the Biden administration is now finalizing plans to announce the commitment of sending Abrams tanks to Ukraine. The U.S.-made M1 Abrams tank, an advanced but complex system that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been asking for months. Important for a number of reasons. First, the shift in U.S. policy. Second, this is a signal, another signal, I should say, of ongoing U.S. support for Ukraine in terms of the weapons and the systems it provides. But perhaps most importantly, it breaks an apparent logjam with Germany. German officials had repeatedly said they would not send or approve the sending of their own German-made Leopard tanks until the U.S. made a similar move. Although it had appeared last week German officials were kind of softening their stance a little bit on that one, it still remained out there. So this, if and when it's announced, and that announcement could come as soon as this week, would break that logjam, allowing not only Germany to send Leopard tanks, but also any of the more than dozen countries that operate Leopards, very much giving Ukraine a direct offensive threat on the battlefield as the war with Russia enters its nears the 1-year mark. Also worth noting that the UK has committed to sending some of its own Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine. So this is a big shift from the administration and certainly big news for Ukraine.
A big reward for Ukraine. This is what President Zelensky has been asking for, saying, I appreciate the thank yous. I need tanks instead. You mentioned the complexity. You mentioned the Pentagon had been resistant because it's a big system. It's a gas guzzler, the logistics and the training involved. Walk us through a timeline here from announcement to deployment.
So this will still take months, if not even longer than that. There's little doubt about that. This isn't likely to come directly from U.S. stocks. It's not likely to be a presidential drawdown, especially because the U.S. just announced a $2.5 billion drawdown of U.S. stocks for Ukraine last week. Instead, this is more likely to come through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. What that means is the U.S. creates new contracts with the tank manufacturers, but that also takes time to manufacture the tanks, to acquire them, and to get them to Ukraine. So, John, this is not something we're likely to see happen immediately.
Ukraine is hoping its Western allies will send them German-made Leopard 2 tanks, but Germany has been resisting so far to do that. However, Germany has said they will not stand in the way if other countries like Poland want to send some of their Leopard tanks. Joining us now to explain all of this and the significance, CNN anchor and national security correspondent Jim Sciutto. This has been all the talk in the past few days. And Germany would technically need to sign off, right, on a country like Poland sending a tank that they made. They're saying they're not going to stand in the way. Can you explain why these tanks matter so much in Ukraine?
Well, it has echoes of debate we've seen since the start of this war, even going back to 2014, the focus on the next big weapons system. You remember all the debate about sending fighter jets in. You know, the West view, not the right weapon for this time, requires too much support. Ukraine wanting those weapon systems. And there are a lot of similarities between that and these tanks now. Let's talk about why specifically. Leopard tank, Leopard 2s, they certainly have some advantages. One is they use NATO standard ammunition, 120 millimeters, which makes it a lot easier for NATO allies to provide that ammunition. They have more than the Soviet-made stuff that go to the tanks that Ukraine relies on now. But the problem is it requires, in general, I've spoken to former tank commanders, more support, more training for the crews, that kind of thing. So the question from the view of some U.S. officials, right, is that this is more of a burden or could be a burden for Ukrainian forces in the field than an advantage right now.
And the idea, too, Jim, right, the belief that these Leopard 2 tanks are much more effective on Ukrainian terrain than than the U.S. tanks. Can you talk about how effective they've fared in the war?
Well, here's the thing. Tanks have not done well in this war. They haven't for either side. Russia has lost, and these are conservative estimates by Oryx, 1,600 tanks, Ukraine close to 500. These are almost certainly underestimates, but let's take those numbers as they are. Thousands of tanks have been destroyed already. They're big targets. Ukraine has had enormous success against Russian tanks in small units using those Javelin shoulder-fired missiles. and now relying on those Bradley fighting vehicles that are going in as well. They have anti-tank weapons. They're smaller, they're faster. U.S. officials believe that's the way Ukraine should be fighting this war. And to kind of make them pin back with more tank divisions will make them more vulnerable, because Russia has great anti-tank weapons. In fact, one U.S. official said to me the concern is that Ukraine will have its own tank graveyards like we saw for Russian forces at the beginning of the war. One final note, Poppy, it's just the numbers we're talking about here. Russia has many hundreds of tanks deployed in Ukraine, more than 1,000. Poland is talking about sending in 14. Germany has a total of 200 Leopard 2 tanks in storage. They're not going to send all of them. So those numbers, the math in terms of writing that balance doesn't quite add up either.
Really lopsided, even if they got all of them. Jim, thanks for that.
Here with me now, CNN military analyst, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander General Wesley Clark. General Clark, good to have you on this morning.
Thank you, Jim.
I want to ask you about the current debate over sending German-made Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Ukraine wants them. I've spoken to U.S. officials who question whether this is the weapon system that Ukraine needs now. In your view, does Ukraine need these tanks now, or should they be focusing on other weapon systems?
Well, I think Ukraine needs the tanks now, but they need a lot of other things now too, Jim. What they've been asking for desperately is long-range drones. This is a Switchblade 600 drone. It's held up in the Department of the Army and some sort of foreign military sales pipeline. If they had this, they could disrupt the ammunition and so forth behind them. They need the Leopard tanks. They need self-propelled artillery. They probably need 300 to 500 main battle tanks. They're talking about maybe getting 100 Leopards from these other. They're in a really tough position, Jim.
Yeah, that's the concern, right, is that the numbers that, Germany in total has 200 Leopard tanks in storage right now. Poland's talking about sending 14. That even if they do get them, given the numbers, the many hundreds of tanks that Russia has, and Russia's very capable anti-tank weapon systems, one U.S. military official said to me the U.S. concern is that Ukraine will have tank graveyards if they try to fight Russia in this style, much like we saw Russia have those tank graveyards early in the invasion.
I wouldn't be too concerned about that, because I think the Ukrainians will keep these tanks in a mobile reserve initially and use them only as necessary or in a counteroffensive role. But I do say this, Jim, the quantity of weapons that we've sent and the responsiveness of sending them is at every stage 2 steps behind. We say we're responsive to the battlefield, but we're not actually anticipating the battlefield. And so we've got the Ukrainians perpetually on a strategic defensive. It's just a matter of time until Russia mobilizes its forces, masses, and gets a breakthrough. Could be in Bakhmut, could be further south. But the Ukrainians know this, and they're fighting, struggling to maintain every inch of Ukraine, because they know that Putin seeks a political victory, and their military is not only working for military, it's not an abstract military problem. This is about their morale, their people, their nationhood. So these are some really tough questions. They deserve our help. They're fighting for us, and we should be giving them quantities and types of systems they need, and do it now.
Well, to your point about anticipating the battlefield, CNN's reporting that is exactly what the West is recommending now. In other words, don't pour so many resources and, frankly, so many lives and bodies into this war of attrition in Bakhmut. Focus on potential offensive in the south, where Ukrainian forces might have more success.
Sure, and I think for as long as I've talked to the Ukrainians, they've looked at this. And Zaporizhia and going after the land bridge is really important. But if you can't hold the back door at Bakhmut, in Donetsk, in Avdiivka, then that offensive in the south doesn't work. So they've got to try to hold the back door on this. Now, whether they hold it tactically, whether they give up 10 kilometers in Bakhmut or something, that's a tactical decision. But they can't simply pull out of this area to the east, and they're locked in this battle with heavy artillery and waves of human assault. It's a really tough tactical problem, and obviously, as Americans, we don't like it, but that's the war they're fighting.
Yeah, and I don't think Americans are quite aware of just the human cost of this, the many hundreds of casualties a day for those Ukrainian forces in that fight in the East. General Wesley Clark, always good to have you on.
Thank you, Jim.